Okay, now I'll start officially. Welcome, everyone. I'm Alex Selfand, coordinator of the Salty Dog webinar series, and welcome to our second webinar in our fall series. If you recall, last we talked about safety preparation, and there's a whole nother aspect to preparing your boat and your crew and yourselves for any kind of a passage and enjoying particularly the Caribbean and the Bahamas. And tonight, Bob Osborne, president of the Salty Dogs, is going to be speaking just about that and relating a lot of his experiences, and I'll throw in a couple of mine when they're appropriate. We will obviously always have room for questions. Put them into the chat so we make sure we don't miss any, and we'll get to them at the appropriate time. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Bob. Bob, I think you're muted. You need to unmute.
All right, terrific. Let me share my my screen. Do you see that, Alex?
It's perfect.
Okay, great. I'm getting some weird thing on the up in the corner there. I don't know what that's all about, but anyway. Welcome, everybody. I'm looking forward to this discussion tonight. It happens to be a topic that I'm really passionate about, given the fact that making the boat comfortable has saved my marriage, I would say. And so I'm going to be talking a little bit about that. Let me get rid of this one thing here. Okay, here we go. All right, so the topic of my talk tonight is making your boat a home. And if it's your home, make it feel that way and to make it look like one. And the reason that's particularly important to me is that my wife, Brenda, is a reluctant cruiser. In fact, my boys, we have two boys in their 30s, and they say, it's Dad, 40 years of desperate moves to make Mom like sailing. And if you're one of those folks that where your partner loves to be on the boat as much as you do, then count yourself lucky, because it's not always the case. But I show you, this is me and Brenda. This is actually 12 years ago on our last boat, a Saga 43. When we were heading down the ICW for the very first time. We spent about a year on the boat on that move. And that was really a big deal for us because we had never done more than a couple of weeks or maybe a month on the boat at any one time. Just to give you a little bit of context, this is Pandora. Pandora is a 2007 Aerodyne, 47-foot Aerodyne. We've owned her for since about 2015. She's a pretty fast boat. She's really tricked out for comfort. And I want to talk a little bit about this whole process of sort of getting from here to there, of being more of a coastal cruiser, or should I say someone who doesn't really have a focus on being on their boat more or less full time. And I say full time, not in the context of, moving onto the boat, or if you're like us, being seasonal, where you spend 4 or 5 months every year on the boat. And we're heading down for what will be our 12th season of doing this. But I think there's a couple of things to think about. You want to seek out those that spend their time on the water and do what you want to do. We're a member of a local yacht club, and if we made a decision on when we were going to live on a boat or not, and we talked to the people at our yacht club, we would never go. In fact, it's interesting, virtually every single time we talk about what we do, we're kind of considered a little bit of a freak at our show, at our club. And that we say, inevitably, they'll say, well, so what do you do for the winter? And we say, we go down to the Caribbean. And then what do you do once you get there? Do you move into a resort? And they're shocked when they hear that we stay on the boat. And then we end up really defending that, explaining why the boat is really very comfortable for us. Also, recruiting mentors is important. You can be a mentor, actually, if you have experience, share that with others. And in fact, we're expanding that program to team up folks that need a little bit of extra guidance or support You don't have to be brand new to this to want a mentor. We had a mentor of two couples that mentored us for the first few years that we were cruising, and it was really helpful. And we're very close to them to this very day. This program of mentoring is available to all Caribbean Rally participants. And of course, just go to cruising events, go to participate in a rally, all of those kinds of things. To hang around with people that are currently doing it is really, really important. Read books. These are 3 books that are actually written by women. It's your boat too. I think that kind of makes the point, but there's a lot to be learned. And certainly on YouTube, there's tons of videos now. But when you move onto a boat, it can be a little bit overwhelming. This was when we bought Pandora back in 17, or excuse me, 15. That's just all the crap we dumped on the boat, and trying to figure out what to take and where to go was a big deal. I'm always a believer that evolution is safer than revolution. I take baby steps. Living aboard is just not like a vacation. It can be hard. Well, the first year we went down the ICW, a guy pulled us aside and said, let me talk about how hard this can be. And we can do things to make it easier. In our particular case, we had a 3-year plan. We did a few overnight runs. We did a month of coastal cruising. Then we went down to the ICW, Florida, spent 8 months doing that. We went to the Bahamas and then on to the Caribbean. And it takes time to get your boat in shape. Traveling company. Obviously, those of you that are on this call tonight are probably very focused on our rally, maybe to the Caribbean or to the Bahamas this year. But we, of course, have our summer down east. Many of you have done that. Hampton to Rockland, a couple of nights at sea. Those of you that may have done the overnight run to Canada with the Maritime Rally, that's I would love to do that, but I've heard it was great this year. But the Caribbean Rally is somewhere between 9 to 14 days to Antigua, and about half of that amount of time. There's no shame in flying to where you're going to go. Brenda doesn't do the blue water stuff. She's done it, but she prefers not to, but she does spend the whole winter on the boat. So consider being crew. And I mention that because I get calls every day from people that are looking for crew, because if 2 of you might spend the winter on the boat like Brenda and I do, but that's not enough to make the run. So whether it's 3 or 4, it's very important to have the extra help. And in fact, it's interesting, really the people that tend to balk at having crew are the people that haven't done it before, because the whole idea is, all boats are small. Do I really want to have people I don't know that well on the boat? But we find that the more experienced people, they always have crew. And in fact, once I explain a lot of these things, it works out pretty well. I've been using crew for about 40 years. Occasionally, I've had some problems, but nothing major. We believe 3 to 4 is about right. If things break, it can be just horrible on a boat steering for 2 weeks, especially if there's just 2 of you. You just never know how things are going to go. And every year, someone loses autopilot. And I won't go into all the details except to say that picking crew, especially if you have Zoom to be able to talk to someone, it can work quite well. And then just as a little bit of information, I'm actually planning to head to Hampton in September and get the boat staged and ready to go down to the Caribbean. I live in Essex, Connecticut, and leaving from Essex for me is a little bit too exciting. We have about 11 boats leaving from Newport this year, but I just prefer to hang out with the larger group in Hampton and avoid the longer run to the Gulf Stream that's up here. But the point is, even now, I was talking to Chris Parker today, and there are cold fronts coming every couple of days off of the coast. They've actually started up earlier this year, so it's recommended that September is a very good time to get to the Chesapeake and get yourself ready. The run south is always harder than the run north. And my runs I've done, it's generally not very exciting coming home all the way up to Essex, but going south can be challenging. And that's why we use Chris Parker. Sometimes it's beautiful, sometimes not so much. Of course, we can catch fish. And I just wanted to we're going to get into more about making the boat comfortable. This isn't exactly a beauty shop, but this is down below on Pandora. And you'll see these covers. What I did is I just put snaps on the back of each cushion, and I just took these pieces of canvas, sewed a hem in the top, cut the sides off with a heat knife, and I just snap them in place. This way you don't have to worry about how, whether someone's sweaty or has sunscreen on or salty or something like that, because it's really hard to keep a boat clean. And by the time you get where you're going, whether it's Antigua or the Bahamas, you want the boat to be back into cruising mode. And there's all kinds of fun things to do. But once the boat gets salty, it stays salty. And not to play up the whole idea of community too much, but wherever we go, we get together. And the weather, of course, this is a hell of a lot better than what you might see up in the Northeast in the wintertime. But let's talk more about making your boat a home. Really, what it comes down to is you need to make room for what you love. Here's Brenda. She is a fiber artist. She weaves, she spins, she does bobbin lace. The list just goes on and on and on. And she feels like she has to leave her people when she comes onto the boat. And there's things we've done over the years to make the boat more comfortable. And I'll show you a little bit later, but we have nice china and crystal. Haha, although they're melamine and Lexan, they look great. And we personalize the decor with pictures of family and artwork. We stick things on the wall with Velcro. And we make sure we have good cooking equipment because Brenda's an excellent cook. I'm an excellent dishwasher. I don't use much water. And we make sure that we have adequate spices and so forth. But what we do is we really work to make comfort a priority. And just a couple of thoughts on that. The first year we went south, we did not have a cockpit enclosure. It was miserable. It was cold and the wind, we never could get the wind to turn off. It was windy all the time. In the Bahamas, whether it's the Caribbean, it's always windy. But there's another big part of it, and that is it increases your living space by 30%. The people who lived on our boat before we bought it, they bought it new in 2007 and they had it for about 7 years. And they didn't have an enclosure. It was amazing. I don't know how they could stand it. And once we put that enclosure in now, some of my friends tease me that, well, you don't even know what the weather's like outside because of all this. But the point is it makes the boat bigger and it's way cheaper to add an enclosure than to buy a bigger boat. We've also put in an engine-driven cabin heater. And what that really means is that's the thing in the upper right there. That is the same kind of heater you have in a car. And you plumb it right to the heating system, rather the cooling system of the engine. Most engines, especially Yanmars, are pre-plumbed for this. You just have to add hoses and some valves, and now hot water will cycle through this, and you can use the engine heat when you're underway. It's inexpensive. It is not marine, so to speak. It's just something you buy from a performance or a camping supply place. They use these in lobster boats up in Maine. It's very easy to install. Also, we upgraded our water heater. The boat that came with just your sort of typical square water heater, and it would hold water overnight for hot. But this one, Isotherm, which I actually just put in a new one today. Sadly, it developed a leak after 7 years, but that thing keeps hot water for 36 to 48 hours. And that's important because we're at anchor. We hardly ever run our engine. We never run our engine to charge our batteries. And I'll talk more about that a little bit later. We've also upgraded our mattress. We have a custom mattress, which we got at the boat show. We have good sheets. We buy good quality sheets. We replace the pillows every year. We have nice towels with the name of the boat on them, and we have a memory foam on the mattress top and the Froley mattress springs underneath. That's the lower right thing. They really do make for a very comfortable boat. And this is just an example of our enclosure. And I thought when we put this on, we would not be using it in the tropics, but we leave it up all the time because it's so windy. We just have to open the side curtains, and the way the boat is designed, air comes right in very comfortably. And when I talk about making it look comfortable down below, these are plates we buy on closeout from Williams-Sonoma. I mean, they sell really nice stuff. And while these aren't cheap like a paper plate, they're very reasonable. And we change them periodically. We have an alarming number of them at home that we've cast off because we found a new shiny one that we just had to have at Williams-Sonoma. And we also have nice plastic glasses and so forth. And you'll notice in the middle of the table, that's that nifty black light. That's a restaurant table light. Not cheap. It's over $100, but they use these at the high-end restaurants in New York, and they recharge and they last for like 3 days of use. And it's really nice. It adds a certain, warmth to the neighborhood. course, things often get crowded on Pandora, but this is not an atypical when we hang out. And making the boat a home is also inviting your friends over. Another thing that's come out a lot in the last few years is really all kinds of rechargeable lights. Back, I can remember many, many years ago, we were constantly, plug this in with a long cord and stick it out in the cockpit. And then we went to the Lucy lights, which they work well, but they're just an inflatable rubber thing. And if you forget to charge them or you don't charge them for too long, the batteries go dead and so forth. But these little lights that Brenda got for me 2 years ago, you'll see the one on the right is pink, the one on the left is white. You can change them to any color. I mean, you can flash them, you can change the brightness. So when we go out in the evening to go ashore, we put the red light on in the cockpit, and then when we come back, it's easier to see what we're doing. So the point is that these last for days before you recharge them, and you recharge them right off of a USB plug. And then there's our little dining light lower right. We also, when we got the boat, we had wired speakers from a stereo, and now we stream audio and have these remote speakers around the boat. It's just simple, and they're not expensive, but the fact is it makes us feel like we're at home. Another thing we've done is custom carpets. I'm kind of anal about the boat. I want everything to be perfect, and we do not allow people down below with shoes. Actually, nobody gets on the boat with shoes. And when I have crew, I say you have shore shoes and you have down below and on board shoes, because nobody wants someone walking into their house with salt all over them. And so yes, these are expensive, but they're washable, and they just sort of finish the look of the boat. Another thing that I did is we have this, the way our boat is laid out, we don't really have a way to sit on the starboard side of the table. So I made an ottoman, and I built it out of wood, varnished it, sent it off, and had it covered. And you can see we keep all of our drinking glasses in there, and to keep them from getting scratched, we put each one in a sock. And I just say, don't use socks. So it really works quite well. What we've also done is, as I mentioned, Brenda really enjoys cooking, except when we're going out to dinner, which we do quite often in the Caribbean. What I did is we really don't need hanging lockers. So I repurposed all of them. You see on the left a before, and then on the right an after. Putting in the shelves, very easy. Fortunately, I have a really nice wood shop, so I could exactly match the wood so that it looks like it was built for the boat originally. And I've done that for several things. Another thing that we really need to have is lots of ways to charge stuff. And this seems kind of silly. We've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 USB ports, and yet they're always full. It's just like home. You want to make sure that your stuff stays charged up. And in fact, we're probably going to add some in other parts of the boat too, so that we don't have to have everything on the nav station. We have nice sheets. As I mentioned, we replace those covers for the whole pillows every year. And we've also we have an electric toilet. Yes, they're more complex. Yes, they have 3 motors, 1 macerator plus an inlet and an outlet motor, but there's just something a little more civilized about pumping away with a slurping toilet. And this is just a nice thing. And boy, these are hungry. They can eat pretty much anything. Although we say, if it hasn't gone through your mouth, it doesn't go into the toilet. So that's maybe a little bit gross, but it works and keeps everything moving along quite nicely. We've also worked really hard to make the boat energy efficient. I should note right now, we do not have a generator on our boat, except a little Honda down in the lower right there. Most boats used to have, and still many do, have a house generator, but with the changes in LED and the improved efficiency of refrigeration equipment, and solar being cheaper than ever, wind generators and lithium batteries, that has changed. We even are able to run our washing machine right off of our batteries and an inverter. And so the point is that do whatever you can to improve energy efficiency. I know Alex has some pretty power hungry equipment on his boat. I don't have as much power as he has, but I'll talk a bit about that in a moment. But also you want to get yourself a nice high output alternator, because if you use the power, you got to put it back. And if you don't have enough solar, it's hard to keep your batteries up to snuff. And one of the surefire ways to kill batteries, not so much with lithium, but certainly with lead acid, is to keep them less than fully charged. Now, Pandora, as I mentioned, doesn't have a house generator. So one of the things, and I mentioned this in Making Your Boat a Home, because nobody wants to live with a power Nazi or a water Nazi, someone who says, don't run that, don't use that water, turn that thing off. And so what we have here is in the front of our engine is a power takeoff, which is basically a small DC generator, although not so small, because that little alternator is 260 amps. It can pound 200 amps full time into the lithium bank. And we also have a water maker. Now, there's lots of different water makers out there. We have a Spectra. And what's unique about Spectra is that it has about double the efficiency of a typical water maker. And that matters because we're able to not worry about how much water we use. Well, we're careful, but not crazy. And it makes 1 gallon for every amp hour. And that really matters if you have a limited amount of power. We know people that have to run their water. If they want their water maker, they got to run their engine. And it's just not fun to have the heat down below and to listen to all that noise. It's much, much easier to just let the sun do all the work. But one thing you really have to think about with RO is water. RO water is acidic. It will eat anything on your boat that's aluminum. Most boats have aluminum water tanks. And if you open up the inspection port in your aluminum water tank and you have an RO unit, you're going to probably see crumbles of white, all kinds of white crumbly stuff on the inside of that water tank. RO water eats aluminum. And trust me, I know it from experience. On my last boat, it destroyed my water tanks. And I learned that you can buy a pH buffer cartridge. And not only does that make the water less aggressive, less acidic, it brings it to pH 7, which is what you want for drinking water. It takes that weird kind of soapy taste away that you get with RO water. And this is where I got it. They're hard to find, but it's a pH neutralizing filter available from McMaster-Carr. They're, I don't know, $30 or something, and they last several years. And you put that after the product, where the product comes out, but before it goes into the tank, and you will find that it makes everything taste a lot better. I should note that my first water heater that was on the boat when I bought it, it was just turned to like a porous mush by the corrosion of the RO water. So that's important. Also, if your boat has AC driven refrigeration, see, I'm all about not running the engine, keeping it quiet, keeping it calm, and enjoying your time on the boat. And a DC driven refrigerator is the way to go, especially if you have adequate ways to make power. The one on the right there is just mine. It happens to be there's two kinds of refrigeration. One is what they call high pressure, and that's really what they get. You have it a home refrigerator. It takes a lot more power. Mine draws 30 amps when it's running, but it doesn't run that much because it has huge holding plates that are probably 3 or 4 times as big as the one on the left. But the one on the left is made by a company called Technautics, and it's very efficient, and it's air cooled. Mine's water cooled, so it's a lot more difficult to manage. And this nice thing about the air cooled one is if you're in the Caribbean or the Bahamas and you need to get your boat hauled, you don't have to throw your food away. Another thing that's really important about living on a boat, making it feel like home, is having a good dink. When I get into this conversation with first timers like all the time, they go down, they use the dinghy that they've been using in the Northeast or in the Chesapeake. It might be a Zodiac or something with a fairly flat front, or not real big tubes. And the first thing they learn when they get down there is the distances are long in the Bahamas, in the Caribbean, everywhere you go, it's a mile, it seems. And it's choppy because the wind is blowing. In the Northeast, the wind is very calm most of the time in harbors, not in the Caribbean or the Bahamas. And you will get drenched, and there's nothing that makes you want to go home than getting drenched on the way to a nice dinner. It is what my sons call a CLM, a career limiting move. Remember back to the whole 40 years of me trying to make Brenda like sailing. The fact is, we've been doing this since we were 16, so maybe it's working, but I still work awful hard at it. But the brands that are most common in the Caribbean are ABs and Caribs. Don't fool yourself and get one made out of PVC. They won't last. Get chaps. These are chaps I had made in Beckway. They're beautiful, and they really keep the sun from killing it. Get supersized air chambers. Find out whatever the dink is. The bigger the air chambers, the bigger the better, and get the lightest weight possible. In the Caribbean, you can buy, or in the Bahamas, you can buy two-stroke engines in most of the islands. Certainly in all of the Bahamas, two strokes weigh a lot less than a four-stroke. I would maybe 60 pounds less for a 15 horse. So what you want is a 9 to 10 foot dinghy, a minimum of, well, not even minimum, just 15 horse, and you can plane with a couple of people on board. It is a lot better than getting drenched. And for those of you that are like us, that are, shall we say, getting on in years, consider a granny bar. You know, probably many of you will be grannies or grandpies. Being on the boat and getting in and out of a dinghy is a hell of a lot easier. We had this made down in let's see, where was it? La Mirande, Martinique, and we had it made at this little stainless place, and he did a wonderful job. Getting in and out of the dinghy, make it feel easier, so you don't want to go home. This is unfortunately not shown deployed on the deck, but it hangs on the side of the dinghy, and it makes it very easy to get on and off of the boat. And you don't want to lose your home, so you can lock it up everywhere you go. And I show this as just a good example. I was too cheap to spend $200 on 20 feet of stainless chains, so I added a piece of cabling. As my dad used to say, locks are there to keep your friends out, and certainly a determined person is going to cut through that wire or that, but it makes it a heck of a lot easier. And want to make it easier to get in and on and off of your home. And this is a passerelle we added. We don't tie up at docks all that often, but in the Caribbean, you rarely tie up at a marina in the Bahamas. There's just not many of them. They're very expensive, but in the Caribbean, they're cheap, like $1 a foot. And this is great. It weighs about 15 pounds, and it's very easy to get on and off of it. One of the things that really was a huge game changer for us last year was Starlink. I had never heard of Starlink. And then when we were moving, we were sitting in English Harbor, and I saw one of these dishes on someone's boat, and I was like, what the heck is that? And he let me share his login, and I was blown away. You know, we were getting 100 megabits a second, and it was unlimited data. We have been struggling for years to feel like we belonged wherever we were, because we were out of touch with family. Difficult. I mean, God, during the pandemic, when we were stuck down in the Caribbean, we just had cell time, and we used that data up, and it was super slow and very, very frustrating to be isolated like that. And for those of you that are grannies or grandpies like us, having the ability to Zoom or FaceTime with your grandchildren or family is just terrific. So basically, I'm an evangelist for Starlink, and I'll talk a bit more about that in a minute. But cell phone coverage in the Bahamas and in the Caribbean is terrific. Some people have sat phones. We don't. We have a sideband, although it's very difficult to talk to people at home. But to feel connected, it's just important. And I would say this is not the topic of tonight, but the T-Mobile is an excellent international phone, so you can use your same phone number. And while you're there, get a local SIM card and bring an unlocked phone from the US, and that way you can make local calls and so forth and so on. And of course, you don't want your house to be on a lee shore, so staying up to date on weather is very important, so you don't feel like you don't belong wherever you are, because being on a lee shore, especially in the Bahamas, which can happen often as the wind shifts, can be very unsettling. So a little bit more about Starlink. It is basically unlimited fast data at anchor and at sea. It works everywhere in the world. You buy this particular RV version. They do have a maritime one. I'll talk about that in a minute. But for $700, you're there and all set. That's everything. What you'll see there is it's mounted to a rod holder that I put up on my radar arch. But it's $150 a month inshore, and worldwide. When you're at shore off sea at sea, you can click on a button in your app and you then pay $2 a gigabyte when you're offshore. That can add up pretty fast, but it beats the alternative. I would not recommend this as a primary communication device in the ocean, because sometimes if it's raining real hard, or if your boat, like mine, is pitching in a seaway, you might lose coverage. But they do have a maritime version. I'll talk about that in a minute, but it's more complex, more expensive, and much, much larger. I mean, you can turn it on and off for being in the ocean just at the flip of a switch, and it is amazing. You don't have to mount it on your boat. You can do what we did for the first season and just lay it up on deck. Now they have the Starlink is an energy hog. It draws about as much power as a small refrigerator. And I'll talk more about power in a moment. But when I have a big 4 kilowatt inverter, and the ability to run a microwave, use a hair dryer, have hot water, and we actually heat hot water right off of our batteries. We've had our power system set up so a number of our appliances run right off of the DC through the inverter. Having a 4 kilowatt inverter makes it much, much easier, but that draws 5 amps all by itself when it's in standby mode. So I bought a little 600 watt inverter, which you can see on the lower right, and I upgraded the cabling to one of my DC outlets, and it runs really well. But the boot up is about 10 amps, and then it draws an average of 5 to 7 amps with average usage. So the maritime version, which will work anywhere in the world, no matter how rough it is, and it just lays flat on your boat, is about twice as big as that one. And that's the size of a very large laptop. It can be, all these units work on 110. You can convert them to 12 volt. There's some kits available. YouTube is full of that information. Same pricing, but the maritime version uses literally double. So if you have the capacity to use a 10 to 15 amps full time, then knock yourself out. But the RV version works pretty well. Now, a lot of the things we've been talking about require power. Now, this is interesting. What you see here is 610 watts of solar. The panels in the front are 80 watt panels. They were put on the boat in 2007. And the one at the back I put on when I bought the boat 7 years ago, and that's a 290 watt panel, giving us a total of 610 watts. What I did not know, you always figure, oh, solar panels last forever. But according to everything I've learned recently, because we tested these 80 watt panels, the smaller ones last summer, and we discovered they were only putting out about 45 watts. They degrade about 5% every single year. And the new panels, which I replaced them with, which you see here, I took the 80 watt panels and I was able, with only a slight increase in size, given the fact that the new panels are a different, more advanced technology, I was able to get 150. So I upgraded. And the one in the back, which is the 290, is about to be replaced by 3 150s. And the 150s are only 6 inches longer, and they'll go forward and aft. But the key thing here is, for $1 a watt plus installation, I was able to increase my solar output by 72%. I went from 650 watts to almost 1,100 watts, which is astounding. I never imagined I would ever be able to do that. Now, you'll see there we have a wind generator. Now, this is a typical wind generator. We had one years ago, and I was horrified by the sound it made. It was just a roar. But this one is virtually quiet, virtually silent. In fact, I had a rather bad injury last winter when I was working on my Starlink installation. The wind generator was so quiet in like 20 knots of wind that I didn't even hear it. I thought it was turned off, and I put my hand up and it tangled with it, and I tore the back of my hand up. What a mess. Blood everywhere, 20 stitches, but so far I'm okay. But the point is, this is one quiet thing. However, you do not put wind on until after you've maxed out on solar, because solar is cheaper, it's easier, and it's way more efficient. But it's great to have something generating power at night. Now, this one is a high output. but it puts out really virtually nothing until about 15 knots, and then it's maybe 3 to 4 amps. But the key is when it's blowing 20 knots, and which is almost always the case when we're on passage and on a close reach or beam reach, it puts out 8 amps, which pretty much covers the boat, which is amazing. So this plus solar makes just an enormous difference. And before you freak out about the cost of all of this, if you don't know this already, the famous Inflation Reduction Act that was passed last year is your best friend. Your boat is your home. It's your second home. And as long as you're not renting the boat out, you can get a 30% tax credit on all of this: solar, wind, lithium, everything. And I'm going to talk a little bit about lithium because we upgraded to that, and that was amazing as well. So talk to your accountant. I have a very straight arrow accountant, and he was suspicious, but when all was said and done, I got over $11,000 back. So the solar panels are much more efficient per square foot. And I talked about the degradation of the older panels. I was stunned at how poor the output was. And I thought it was my batteries, but it wasn't. It was the solar plus crappy batteries. But at $1 a watt, you can hardly afford not to do this. So you figure for $1,000 of panels, you can upgrade to 1,000 watts of solar, which is amazing. You will have to buy new controllers, but they're only a couple $100. I bought mine from richsolar.com, which is something that Hank George recommended. He was my predecessor as president. He knows his stuff. So I was really pleased. And several of my friends have gotten their Rich Solar panels, and they work. They're not a sponsor of Salty Dog. Maybe they should be, but they make a good product, and it's free shipping anywhere in the country. So I want to move on to lithium here. And all this really relates back to comfort, because having a boat that's well found and put together, we rely so heavily on electricity, whether it's to heat water or to cook our food or to just make sure we can keep the lights on, that making us feel good and comfortable on the boat, and to keep that Starlink in spades, it requires a lot of power. We use several hundred amp hours every day, but we're putting out, 4+ kilowatt hours of power just from our solar. So that's an impressive amount. But you really have to have some place to put it. And so we upgraded to lithium. It was not a simple swap. Your insurance company will freak out unless you go through an ABYC certified electrician. That's really important, because you do not want to have a fire with a lithium battery. And all lithium batteries are not alike. And there's the kind that we have on our boat are not prone to fires. They're not the super high output ones you get like in a cell phone that can burst into flames. And I'm told that it is virtually impossible to put out a lithium battery fire. And the idea of having that happen hundreds of miles out into the ocean is pretty horrifying. So let's walk through the numbers. There was a time when AGM lifelines were like the living end of batteries, and we had 4 8Ds. That was 650 pounds of lead acid batteries. Our house bank, 250 amp hours per battery, 1,000 amp hours. We never went below 85% or 80%, because it would kill your batteries if you do that. So you really can't only use about 25% of that capacity. And maybe if you really work it well and you have solar and you don't let them sulfate, maybe 7 years, but that 7th or 8th year, you're going to be struggling. I was struggling with my batteries. So 25% of 1,000 amp hours is basically 250 amp hours of usual power. And that worked just fine. And at 160 pounds each, that was really heavy. So what we did is I have a 24 volt boat, so I had to put 4 batteries in, wired in series for 24 volts. And I went with a lithium upgrade. I have 4 210 amp hour batteries for a total of 840 amp hours, a little less than I used to have. And I saved, what did I save? 400 pounds of weight, which I can fill with, well, no problem there. But Pandora is not a heavy boat, but with all the junk we have to make our boat feel comfortable, it's a heavy boat. But the amazing thing is that 840 amp hours, we can use 95% of it. And what's even more amazing is that batteries, a lithium battery puts out 13 volts all the way until it doesn't. It's just like the lights blink out, just like your cell phone. It runs and runs and runs, and then all of a sudden it's just turns off. But you can use most of the power but what's amazing to me is between the wind generator and the the solar panels, the lowest I found myself on passage was like 85, 90% because I was able to put it all back. And before with AGMs, I was fighting every day without a generator to keep those batteries up. I had to run my engine. It just was not great. A little interesting little side effect though is our water maker, since it's a 24-volt water maker, the motor that powers the pressure pump is very voltage dependent. And my battery, my pump actually puts out more pressure. So I get about a 15 to 20% increase in the amount of water the water maker puts out. It puts out more than it's rated for now, which I'd never imagined would happen. It also, with higher voltage, your equipment will be happier and it will last longer. And then of course the batteries last forever, like 20 years, I'm told, but it's pretty remarkable. So we went from 250 usable amp hours to almost 800. So that's 3 times the energy, and the batteries weigh a third of what they used to weigh. So I'm not going to belabor this except to say that another key point is that lithium will suck up as much power as you can imagine. I have this 200 amp alternator, and it'll take, or 260, it'll take 200 amps all the way up to full charge, and then it just stops charging. Pretty unbelievable. We could used to, with our AGMs, even when they were new, you could charge, took like forever, more than a day if you really wanted to get it to 100%, because as the batteries became closer to full charge, the resistance grew so that they wouldn't overheat. That does not happen with the lithium. It just pounds away. Now that they have to be governed so you don't put too much in, because you do not want to overheat a lithium battery. But if it's properly set up, it'll charge amazingly. I mean, in like an hour, you can fill them all the way back up. And with solar, every day before lunchtime, they're fully charged. It takes it as fast as they can put it out. Definitely worth doing. And with a 30% tax credit, it's hard to say no. So now let's talk a little about provisioning. The key is it makes it easier. You know, it's hard when you're on a boat. It's like, what do you want for dinner? Well, I don't know. We don't have anything. I got to go get it. So it's better to provision early. And if you don't eat at home, don't put it on the boat. We've been carrying around a can of corn for the last 5 years. I think it's time to toss it out because we just don't eat canned corn. But except when we make salsa. But in any event, the point is, put on the boat what you can, and double bag everything in Ziploc bags. Some people talk about cardboard, bringing things like roaches and stuff onto the boat. We've never had that experience, but certainly in the islands, I would be careful about that, especially in the Bahamas where stuff might sit around for a little bit longer. But we double bag everything in Ziplocs when we put it on the boat, and even after a while, it gets stale. And make a list of where everything is, so you know, so you can find it. When we sold our last boat, we found stuff we didn't even know we had because we just stuck in a little corner. But the key point, though, is before you head down, pick the things you care about, the brands you care about, lightweight stuff, paper towels, feminine hygiene products, toilet paper, potato chips, anything that's light is going to cost a lot more because it takes up a lot of room. And the way shipping works is that it's not about the weight. It's about the volume. So a truckload of paper towels will cost the same amount to ship as a truckload of, say, filet mignon. So the shipping costs can be quite high. One thing to think about if you're going to the Bahamas, and I'll talk a little bit more about this, the food is a lot more difficult to get. You can get it, but frozen meat, whether in the Bahamas or in the Caribbean, tends to be in big bags, nothing like it's really sold in the United States. You get frozen chicken legs and you might have to buy 20 of them. And it's very hard to manage all that stuff. Most boats don't have that much freezer capacity. And some items may be unfamiliar. So if you have certain things you like, or maybe you're not as adventurous an eater, you'll feel more at home if you bring along what you like. I talked about food in the Bahamas. Everything in the Bahamas is imported. Everything. They don't grow anything except a few bananas here and there. But most of the things you buy will be twice as expensive as they are in the US. Very few grocery stores, a couple of small shops. There's really like 3 large grocery stores in the Bahamas, one in Marsh Harbor, one where else? In Nassau, and then one down in Georgetown. Other than that, they're tiny little places, and they're fed by mailboats, and the stuff comes from Miami. It's unloaded at one of the major ports like Nassau, put into a mailboat, and then shipped out. So I mean, by the time you get that head of lettuce, it's looking a little long in the tooth, and you're going to pay $10 for it. So it's quite alarming and difficult, especially if vegetables are a big part of your life. You know, you can think about that. So canned products from the US that may partly substitute might be a good idea. Bread is also challenging. We're big bread makers. We don't buy bread generally, except in the French Islands where the bread is awesome. But the pretty much in the Bahamas, bread is sort of your sort of sweet, basic white bread. It's very good, but maybe to us being more of kind of sourdough type folks, it's somewhat interesting. So we have had great success in making sourdough, where we make our own sourdough and then make bread, or getting flour and a yeast makes great bread. And because the bread, it's breezy in the Caribbean, if you have good ventilation on the boat, the oven doesn't really heat things up that much. Dining out can be somewhat limited. That is always a challenge for us in the Bahamas, but it's absolutely beautiful. In fact, we're going to spend part of the season there this year. But think fried chicken and baked chicken and hamburgers, unless you're spending $100 a person, and everything is imported. In the Caribbean, there's a lot more choice. You have small groceries and large chains, and a lot of materials are flown in. The French Islands, they have daily flights from Paris. And so you get these absolutely magnificent little heads of lettuce and so forth and so on. But like the Bahamas, you're going to be out wandering everywhere. So make sure you have a good wheel cart for provisions. We got ours at Trader Joe's. It's a terrific wheelie bag. And again, double bagging everything in a Ziploc. And if it's particularly sensitive to moisture, maybe double bagging in Ziploc. In terms of feeling at home, wine is less expensive than the U.S. in the French Islands in particular, and you can get great cheeses. In the English Islands, not. I mean, the food is good, but you won't get the choice of cheeses and wines, except maybe in some of the fancier grocery stores that you get in the Caribbean. Excuse me, in the French Islands. And there's a load of places to dine out, and mostly local produce in more of the rainy islands, which would be Guadeloupe and Martinique and St. Martin and so forth, where they grow all that stuff. So let's talk just a little bit. We're almost done here, but one thing that we found early in our cruising career is we'd be going out for a 2-week vacation and something would break and it would just wreck it. And we'd be like, oh God, I want to go home. But now we carry appropriate spares. And what we learned over the years, aside from the obvious oils and filters and belts and so forth for the engine, we also bring a lot of other spare parts. Our boat is a 24-volt boat, and like good luck buying a domestic water pump in 24 volts anywhere in the Caribbean or the Bahamas, except maybe in St. Martin. We can do that, but most everywhere else, it's like 12 volt. So we carry spare water pumps, macerator pumps. I talked about those finicky but wonderful electric toilets. We carry all those spare pumps, spark plugs for the outboard. You have to keep your outboard up to snuff. We have ours serviced every 2 years or more frequently to make sure that it always starts on the full first pull. Nothing is worse than, and you hear every morning on the radio, can't start my outboard, can someone help me? And then have ways to seal hatches and rebed things, because nothing's worse than a leak. And bring various bedding compounds and so forth and so on. But really what it is the whole cruising thing. When people wonder, am I going to miss home? Am I going to have fun? Am I going to be bored? People say, what do you do all day? Well, we hang out with people. There's just like this movable neighborhood. And we celebrate. I mean, this is Brenda. That was our first trip south, and it was her birthday. And she was very teary about being away on her birthday. In fact, she was born mid-January, so every year she kind of feels a little bit left out. But a birthday cake, a Zoom meeting, or hanging out with friends. This picture was taken 12 years ago, and there in the background is Bill Hoover. Excuse me, Bill on Kaluna and we still hang out with them to this day. Bill and Maureen were our mentors on our very first trip over 12 years ago. And it's just wonderful to make friends and to hang out. And of course, you may not be home, but holy cow, it's pretty nice hanging out. So it's good to chill, go to the beach, watch spectacular sunsets. But really what it comes down to is you got to cast off those dock lines and hang out with the dogs. And one of the wonderful things about Salty Dog is the community, and we feel at home with Salty Dogs. Maybe Brenda doesn't have her people with the material she likes, or folks that like to do painting and so forth, but you'd be surprised at what you can accomplish if you set your boat up in the right way. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Alex. I'm going to unshare and oops, let's see, how can I unshare here? How do I do that?
I think you go to share screen and there should be a place to say stop.
Stop share. There we go. Sorry about that.
Oh, great.
No
Thank you.
matter how many of these I've ever done, it seems like every time is some little technical thing, but that was actually better than most. So I'm going to let you say a few things there, Alex, and then we'll go to questions.
Okay. Well, first off, thanks very much, Bob. You did a great job and you covered a tremendous number of topics that brought a lot of smiles to my face. Let's cover the questions in the chat first, and then I'll make some other comments. So Bill had a question. Can you give us an idea of the equipment costs for the enclosure, heated and improved water heater?
Well, let me talk about that. The water heater, I just had to replace that. According to the manufacturer and to the people I talked to at Defender, where I ended up buying it, the failure I had, which was basically in the coil that the engine heat goes through, was a failure. And but that lasted 7 years, unfortunately, not 5, because 5 years is the warranty, and I paid $900 for that thing. It's expensive, probably half again more than any other heater out there, but they are absolutely awesome. It will hold water, and in the enclosure, well, it's a little bit like asking how much a car costs, and it certainly depends upon where you had it done. But I paid about $5,000 for that, and that's a lot of money. But we are very meticulous about keeping it up to date. Every year when we go south, we take parts to Franklin at A&F Canvas in Falmouth and have him work on it. But to me, it's a little bit like when you're running out of fuel and you need 1 gallon to get home. How much would you pay for that gallon of fuel? And when we headed south the very first time, one of the guys pulled, he knew I was really gung-ho and Brenda was a little less enthusiastic about the whole thing. And he pulled me aside and he said, I'm hoping we can make this your first trip and not your only trip. And so to me, that enclosure, which I wish I had put on before I ever had south the first time, was probably one of the very best investments, because after a while, just being out in the weather just got old. And I have a friend who crews for me. He's going to do what he does. He's done it many times. He said, I would never crew on a boat that doesn't have an enclosure. So I would definitely encourage that.
Okay. The next question was, what make is your wind generator? Somebody guessed it was Marine Kinetics. Is that?
It is. You win a prize. Yep. Yes, I picked that one because I didn't do any research. I just went up to boats. Well, I did research. I went up to boats in the rally and I said, I can't hear your wind generator. What kind is that? And each one of them, the 2 that I talked to, said Marine Kinetics. It is absolutely, it's so silent. I put my hand into it, was running. It was pretty horrifying.
Great. Okay. And then there was a question about, does anyone know anything about Firefly batteries?
Oh yeah, I have several friends that have had them and they rip them out. They do not last very long, unfortunately. And I heard that actually from the guys at Lifeline a few years ago. He said, we're not sure how they're going to last. And there was a friend of ours who will remain nameless, who was very hot to trot. He had them for about 3 or 4 years. He ripped them out and put in lithium.
Okay. So feel free to put more questions in. I'm gonna put a couple of other plugs in. First, I will tell you that Bob told me so back last year before we went down to the Caribbean, that my very lightweight and inflatable and we did have an outboard engine as opposed to an electric engine, wasn't going to cut it. And he was right. So when we're talking about getting a fairly big, robust dinghy with a good engine, it's a marriage saver, just like all the other things that Bob talked about. So really look into that. There's a question about where'd you get the restaurant lights? I have another version very similar to that. We got them on Amazon. In fact, we were in a restaurant in St. Martin and they had them on the table. I can't show you the pictures that I have because I'm having trouble sharing stuff tonight. But the restaurant, our server said, yeah, people sometimes want to steal them and put them on their boats. They're great. They're really,
You know,
really.
I will say, if you email me, any of you, Bob at saltydogsailing.org, I will send you a list of all the individual items that I talked about. The cabin heater, the specific, I'll give you links to the batteries. I'll give you links to the restaurant lights and so forth. We love we love those little plug-in lights. I mean, I just think they're just amazing.
Yeah, they're beautiful, and they've got a couple of different color tones, so it
Mhm.
really sets up your cockpit really nicely. And there's a lot of different styles that are out there. Another plug I'm going to put, if you have the power, and Bob and I were talking about this just before we started. We put an Instapot on our boat. I've got about 11, well, we have 1400 watts of solar and 500 amp hours of lithium and a huge Quattro inverter. And we use the Instapot to do a lot of our cooking now. We used it on our passage back from St. Thomas every day. It's a real game changer because you can cook stuff really quickly and you're not using as much propane as you would otherwise. So that's a plug for a company that's going out of business, but it's worth thinking about. And then one last thing I'll put a plug on, again, if you have the power, literally, I think 2 days before we left Hampton last fall, I ordered a small ice maker, which is no taller than a winch handle and no wider than a winch handle. Looks like a bread maker. And again, we use that all the time. It makes it so much easier to obviously have cold drinks. We were making ice the old-fashioned way in our freezer and then kind of trying to harvest it. But what we do now is we make ice during the day, harvest it as it gets produced, put it in the freezer, and then shut it down at night. So that's just a couple of things. Mike,
Let me add to that, Alex, about ice. We have a pretty big freezer. But the problem is it's very hard to find ice trays that you can just drop into a freezer without them leaking while they're unfrozen.
correct.
So we got this idea from Mark and Lynn on Roxy. Yeah, we have these little, I'm gonna, for lack of a better term, Tupperwares that with a screw-on lid, they're just the size of a drink glass. And we fill them with water. We put through a Brita filter and we fill them up, screw the tops on, drop them into a bag and drop that into the freezer. And so we end up with these great big chunks of ice that just barely fit in a glass and they don't melt very fast. And that works quite well for us. And I should also note that we have a Seagull water filter, one of those super expensive. I mean, the cartridges are like $200. It's insane, but they make the water taste so much better. And then we run that through a Brita filter and we keep that available so we don't have to go through the whole bottled water thing.
That's a great idea.
Oh, and Alex, you should talk about the CO2 thing. That makes
Yes,
really
yes.
looks great.
Great one. Before I do that, Mike reminded me to talk about headsets.
Oh.
We started, we started using headsets right from the start with our catamaran. And again, it's the best thing you could ever do. One, there's no more screaming. It doesn't matter where you are on the boat, you can talk to each other. There are some headset models out there that'll give you up to 5 units, so you could have everybody on the boat connected. It makes things like reefing, and when someone's got to go forward, and somebody's in the cockpit at the wheel, it makes it much, much easier to communicate. And for any of you that are going back north again to northeast to New England, it makes it a lot easier to dodge lobster pots because somebody could be watching up forward or wherever they're positioned. The other really cool thing that we have is, and I just forgot the name of it makes seltzer, SodaStream. Yes, so SodaStream is also a really great device. A couple of the boats that went down this year actually bought external, I think 5-pound or 5-pound CO2 cartridges that you could, or CO2 canisters that you could fill in a soda supply store. And there are some connections you can get that'll hook that up, as opposed to having to buy individual cylinders. Although we opted to just we bought 3 SodaStream cylinders before we left, and I don't think we ended up using all of them by the time we
No.
were done.
It lasts a long time.
And that means no more cans. It makes the water that came out of the water maker, it tasted really good. So highly recommend that.
Well, we've been at this for an hour, and I don't want to, belabor this, but I think the key here, in summary, is that you have to think about the things that are important to you, and that being on a boat is hard. There's no question about it. I mean, sometimes it's easy, but more often than not, I mean, when you go shopping, it seems to do like forever. To do the laundry takes forever. To go grocery shopping is a bit of a scavenger hunt. Wherever you are, it just is. But if you lean into that and you pick the things that really matter to you, it can be tremendously rewarding. But don't underestimate how jarring it can be to go from being able to just run to a grocery store every evening when it's time for dinner, or to flick a switch and have the TV turn on and so forth and so on. But the technology that's out there, especially Starlink, and the ability to stream movies or grandchildren or any of that other stuff at will, it just makes lean into the things that matter to you, and you will enjoy your time aboard.
All right. Again, Bob, thank you very much. This was a really great chat. Reminder to everybody, our next webinar, I think, is September 5th. David Walters Yachts will be our speaker that night, and we'll be talking about offshore cruising boats. So with that, I will stop the recording. And if you have any other questions, feel free to email either Bob or myself at saltydogsailing.org, and we will get you the answers.
Thank you, Alex.